Here we go. Welcome to the Minvo Procast. Today, well, I should say, I am your host, Marc Ronick, and today joining me, we have Ana Xavier, and Ana is an old friend of mine, and maybe this is a common theme people are starting to notice. A lot of my guests are people that I've met at different podcast conferences, and Ana is absolutely one of those people. You know, in the past, some of our guests I had some connection with leading into Podcast Movement or PodFest or one of these different conferences. I've had these, little conversations here and there with some of the people. And then when I got to the conference, that's where I really got to know them. In my case here with Ana and I just blindly met. I think it was at one of the parties one night at Podcast Movement in Nashville a couple of years ago. And then our relationship, I think, really took off once we were back at home and we started collaborating, talking, working with other people. And that's where the relationship flourished. I'm looking forward to the Minvo community getting to know you as well, Ana. So first, officially, I guess it's afternoon now. So good afternoon to you, Ana. And I want to ask you this question first. Where are you located right now? Because I know you're kind of in the middle of a move soon.
Yes. Hi, Mark. I'm so excited to be here. I guess it's the default, like, so excited to be here. That's what everyone says, but it's
Yeah,
true. I'm so
it
excited
is.
to be here. I've been loving the sessions you've been hosting, so super pumped to be a guest. I'm based in Dallas, Texas right now, but I'm going to be making a move soon in the fall to Bentonville, Arkansas. So this may be one of the very last few sessions that I recorded here in my office. So womp womp.
That's right. Yeah. And wow, so that's a big move. And that's how you feeling about that move going, because I know you've been working hard on your studio space, and I'm sure people can see here how nice it looks behind you. So how are you feeling with a move coming up and having to start all over with that?
Well, it's a labor of love. I love interior design. I'm a very creative person. If you're watching this, you can tell that there's a little bit of like, a vibe. And so I'm sad because definitely took a lot of time, but at the same time, hey, just another opportunity to do another studio redesign and optimize what I've been doing. So in that sense, I'm excited, but I'm a little worried because the new space, we don't have a new place yet. So thinking about, like as a creator, you're always thinking about, will there be noise on the road? What are the neighbors like? What is the light situation? Like acoustics, all of that. So it's going to be a challenge, but like I feel like it will be a good creative challenge, especially in the fall. You tend to feel a little bit like slowing down. So I'll be like focusing on like all of that. So it'll be a good fall project, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. And it's a lot of work too. And I'm sure a lot of the people that are watching can relate to that idea of, oh my gosh, I literally just built this haven, this awesome space for myself, and now I've got to tear it all down and start all over. That is a real struggle for creators. And you also have to get used to that space too, right? We get really comfortable in these
Yeah.
environments we create for ourselves, and then to have to start from scratch and rebuild, it takes a minute to really get used to it, right?
Yeah, especially if you do a video podcast or if you're recording any videos, you really need to think about the space and how it will look. Because again, talking a little bit about like you're creating a brand that is recognizable online, like it is about the little things, right? Your colors, the elements within your space, where you're positioning yourself, how you're best lit. For instance, we were just talking about before going live where in Dallas there's overcast today. And so I actually, since renovating the space, haven't had like an overcast day because it's been summer. And so I'm like, oh, darn, like, what do I do? How do I, position everything? So
Because you were
just
using natural light.
right, exactly.
Right.
Thank you. So now it's just having an additional light and thinking about how it will change through the interview. Because sometimes, whenever you're live, like everything they were not expecting happens.
Hmm.
So it's just like, okay. One time I had to do manual, like adjust the camera. In real time on a live stream just because the light changed so much because we recorded at the end of the day and I was like, oh, hang on, let me
Hmm.
adjust this. And so that was, interesting, but yeah, like new space always creates that opportunity. But at the same time, like how to create cohesive branding that, helps people recognize your brand and actually engage with your stuff versus like, oh, I didn't know it was them, right? So it's so important to be mindful of the little things that help our audience connect to us.
Yeah, absolutely. And that podcast space sign behind you, like that's one for me that I instantly connect with right. I don't even have to read the words. It's just when I see that yellow glowing sign, it's like, oh, I know this is Anna's content. Like that is absolutely a signature for you, at least through my eyes.
Yeah, exactly. Like my branding colors and the neon sign has been the two elements that most people they always say like it stops the scroll, right? Because they recognize and kind of like when there's a lot of noise, it really helps create those little micro like moments where people like, oh wait, I know this person either by their face or their elements. Like it really helps with people just being like, oh, hang on, like it's not zombie scrolling.
Yes,
You got to
right.
do something. So yeah, that's definitely true. And in your case, the same thing. Like your colors, your oh my god, blue. I was like, what's the name of the color? Blue.
Wow.
Yeah, that's always something recognizable. Your
Hmm.
elements in the back.
Yep. Yeah, and I know that Kermit the Frog over there, that also catches some attention as well.
Yes,
Even though it's not blue, it doesn't really work with the brand colors, but people have known my passion for Kermit the Frog in the past, so I
true.
keep him here in the background for that. Cool. Well, and there you go. Already, this interview has gone in a different direction than I had anticipated, and I love it. But let's let people know a little bit more about you. For example, I know you've been creating content in the creator space since 2008, which, let's face it, kind of feels like a lifetime ago, especially in the digital world.
Yes.
So, how have you seen the content creator industry evolve, especially I should say, digital marketing taking such a central role?
Yeah, it definitely has changed. And also, I'm originally from Portugal. That's where I started my career. I worked in radio in Portugal, then moved to the UK. So there's like also that, and did like online radio and podcasts there, and working on the profits, and then moved to the US. So like that in itself, like I will just say that there's different elements. I'd say that what is really interesting about the creator space is that even just looking at what content looked like right back in 2010s, everything was very like corporate. You had to, in order to be taken seriously, you had to look almost like a professional and look very, very serious. And you had to have a little bit of a voice like this. You couldn't talk like a normal person because then people would be like, they're not good enough, right? So
Mm-hmm.
there was like all of these elements. You had to be having like a really professional setup to really lock in, let's say, like brand sponsorships or deals. Or to be part of a network, right? And so today, I mean, the word of the year last year was authenticity. And people are really leaning into that and more that kind of grassroots. Again, if you look at all the creators, the big creators in the space, like that transition to becoming more like a air quotes a regular person has really shifted how people think of content and how almost sometimes if it's too polished, if it's like there's no jump cuts, right? Like if it's just like one continuous take, you lose people's attention. So you really need to think about how are people consuming content. And today is just more like, dare I say it, a little rougher than it was before. And it's just also more creative. I definitely think you have more room to experiment with different concepts. As before, you had to follow air quotes the right way to do it. You couldn't do two types of pans. Like you had to be like, okay, it's either like a vertical panning or like a horizontal panning, and you
Mm-hmm.
cannot mix. You cannot mix. So it's just like
Yeah.
what? So
Yeah.
very very different.
Yeah. Very different. And I think maybe that's because back when, in the earlier days of creating digital content, we only had what the professionals were doing to go off of, right? So
Exactly.
all we had was TV, radio, movies, whatever that content was. That's all we had to work with. So we mirrored that, we mimicked that. But as the creator space grew online, I think that's where it started to evolve. And messy started being more accepted,
Yeah.
right? And I think there are still people out there that are more old school editors that will try to edit more like the old days, but it just doesn't work right now. So I found myself having to kind of reteach some amazing editors how to edit in today's space because it's so different from years ago.
Yeah, and you're so right. Like you have a key element there, which is you have to retrain yourself. If you're a professional that has worked in radio or in media, you have to really lower those like kind of standards. You got to be like, okay, that worked for then, it's not going to work for now. And so I would always change that idea of like when people go, oh, I cannot possibly do this because I'm not media trained, especially because I work with a ton of non-media trained people, just regular business owners who are like, I want to start a podcast. Like, do I need to go get like a vocal coach? Do I need to go and get media trained? I'm like, no, like, how do you show up as yourself as in a professional matter is enough, and let's connect with a human, not necessarily like the professional. And I think that a lot of the video, when it removes that, like those imperfections, it distances the creator from the audience. And so making mistakes or making mistakes intentionally, or just making sure that you come across as someone who is accessible is more important than having the perfect edit. Again, combining those elements of like, of course, you're not going to be like in your bed one time. I was not producing this podcast. It was I worked in a studio, and one of my coworkers was working in this podcast, and the show was about CEOs, and this lady forgot about the show, and so she came in hot on the live stream with just like a hairnet, and she was just waking up, and from her bed we were like, okay, this is not good. That's the not authentic, like kind of a road to extreme. Let's not worry about, how we look. That's not what I'm going to suggest. But like, that was like a no-no, because the whole brand is about like being a CEO and being a leader. And so it's just kind of like, well, no, lady, I can still see your bags under your eyes. Like, just do not show up. But there's like a whole, and I'm sure you can talk to this as well, like where there's the perception of what it is to show up professionally and what it is to show up in a way that is completely unreasonably professional, right? So I feel like a lot of people think that they go immediately to the other side, which is like they have to look like they're on TV, like they're hosting like the TV news. And like, no, if you have a background that looks professional and you're looking in a professional setting, I mean, that's totally valid and you can deliver a ton of value. But for instance, you don't need to wear makeup. I'm not wearing makeup on this live stream right now intentionally, because, it's about showing up and delivering value to your audience, and not necessarily all about like the other elements that we thought had to be musts of content creation before, and not anymore.
No, I love that. Okay, so let's dig into more of this content stuff, because you've always, at least for as long as I've known you, you've stressed the importance of identifying a content idea that really aligns with and maybe accelerates business or professional goals, right? So what's your approach when you're guiding clients to pinpoint that perfect idea?
Yes. So 100%, because why do we do anything that we do, right? I think that identifying the why behind any content idea, any purpose, like any video, any podcast series, any social media clips, like any of that has to go with what's the purpose of these one piece of content that we're putting out, because it will be very different if you want to just create that digital footprint. So someone Googles you and they find all of these clips. To, for instance, someone who actually wants to convert like the viewer into a customer. So the way that we pick a topic, the way that we pick a style of content, whether that's going to be a social media clip, that's like a newsletter, that's whatever it is, it will be really determined by like the purpose of this whole thing, right? And so I think that a lot of people think that they post something online and they have to have comments, they have to have likes. And I'm like, well, if the sole purpose is getting you comfortable with creating content, it's just getting the reps in that's going to matter. So you don't care so much about like initially the engagement. Sure, again, those are indicators if the content is performing or not. But really thinking about like, why are we doing this? Because so many people get stuck on the likes, the comments, the like all the things, the vanity metrics as we call them, that don't really think about like maybe all I want is just to get comfortable in front of the camera. Like for instance, when I started doing Instagram stories on my phone back in 2020 when I launched the podcast space, in my mind, what I wanted to do was, because I came from the background of production and radio production and being behind the scenes, I was like, as a business owner, I cannot hide behind a camera anymore. I have to be visible to connect to an audience, to connect to my ideal customer. And so it really helped me get comfortable because, again, I wouldn't have been able to do a video podcast 2 years or 3 years later had I not started those like simple 15-minute clip in doing it. And at the time, not that many people were doing video anyway. But today it just feels like everybody's doing it. And so I would say that just starting and really getting laser focused on what it is that you want is going to help you like get clarity in the long run, because we can get distracted by all the things, right?
Yeah. And so what do you say to the content creator that says, I'm comfortable getting in front of the camera and I'm ready to make the content, and maybe they're still a little inexperienced or whatever, but really more importantly, they are still focused on view count, number of likes, etc. I mean, is there a time where that's okay, that if that's the goal? And if it's not okay, what do you tell them to help them get past that?
Right. So those are two different things. So when they really care about the views and the comments, just really look at the analytics to understand what is resonating and what isn't, and really have those conversations. Both you and I went to Podcast Movement, and so many people at sessions were like, get to know your audience, understand what they want from you, understand what they prefer content-wise. If they want shorter content pieces, stop creating videos that are 40 minutes long, unless you really want it. But really think about like what is the purpose of this thing, and then map it out toward the analytics, right? So just understand like maybe, and I think that is important to understand that there's public engagement and private engagement. And even the CEO of Instagram was talking about how they actually prioritize a lot of the shares. And so he was talking about like you can share content in two ways. You can share it with a friend privately via message, or to a group, or you can share it publicly on your Instagram stories, for instance. And so the purpose of each one is very different. So I create a lot of content that is aimed at people saving it so they come back to it later. And so what is associated with that is like that perception of value, right? You're creating something that people want to come back to, whether they want to be inspired or educated. Like that is the kind of thing that I'm like, okay, I rather see like metrics that are kind of like hidden versus the public ones. Or maybe you want to start a conversation with your community, right? And so we have to think about, if we want more comments, we have to create a piece of content that will get people to comment. It isn't just like sharing a piece of content. Like at the end, you have to tell people, or be a little more like tongue-in-cheek and more cheeky to enhance that feeling of like, oh, I really want to engage with that. I really love that. Or like, I really disagree with that. And I don't think enough people think about like what is like the user's action after watching that video or after reading whatever you posted, right? And so really thinking about backwards, like after someone watches this content, what do I want them to feel? Do I want them to save it and send it to a friend? Do I want them to comment? Do I want them to send me a message? Like really thinking about what is associated with this piece of content that I want them to do, because you can do the same piece of content can kind of like incentivize two different types of behaviors. So what do you want? And again, people will like to be told what to do. And so what is the next step that you want them to do? So tell them. So if you're struggling with engagement, really think about like, have you been wanting to get more comments? Well, then tell people like, hey, tell me what your thoughts are in the comment section, or then maybe ask directly on the comment section, like be the first one to comment, because I see a lot of people not talking about this. Like it's hard to be the first one to comment. So put your first comment there, right? And so the second,
when you say that, Anna, what do you mean? You mean the person making the creator
yes.
go in and just put a comment in there first, just to get that flow in for people? Okay.
Yes. Yeah, I thought it was really interesting, and it's true. I mean, sometimes you see a post and you're like, "Oh, I really want to engage with that," but you're like, "See, nobody else has engaged." It kind of like, okay, no. And versus seeing a post that already has some comments, you're more likely to feel drawn to comment. And then on the other hand, actually, if you want to stand out, be the first one to comment as an audience member because the creator will really appreciate what you're doing,
Hmm.
right? And so that's a great way to actually connect to other creators, be the first one to always like show up for them. And so like that is like a great way. And so what was the second part of the question, that it was like if people don't care that much about the comments, but what should they focus on? Was that the question?
Yeah, that is exactly what it
Okay.
was. Yeah.
Okay, well then, if they don't care about comments and stuff, like really think about like why you're online. Is the reason for just basically maybe you have not created any type of content and you want to start getting content. I would advise you to not be everywhere because a lot of people say like, oh my social media or my podcast like it's kind of like a graveyard of engagement. Well, I want to say maybe you have been trying to spread yourself too thin. So let's pick and be intentional about which social media we want to engage with and the ones that we're naturally drawn to. Like for instance, let me give a clear example. I use Instagram and LinkedIn. Those are the two main platforms that I create content on. And before I used to do TikTok and like Twitter and LinkedIn and Instagram. So like all of them. And then through the years, I think it took me about 2 years that I was like, okay, what do I want to really do? And again, Instagram, I love design. I love graphic design as well. And so for me, it was a no-brainer to create beautiful content. Like that's where Instagram is kind of like geared toward. And then LinkedIn for professional connections. So those are two very different angles that I am taking with the same content because I'm trying to optimize for both. And so really thinking about what will the person watching they don't need to necessarily engage, but just basically seeing you create content time and time again, you will have opportunities. Like I always say this because a ton of opportunities came through to me because like a client commented on someone else's post that was saying like, oh, we're looking for speakers, who should we like think about, and they tagged me, and then I basically comment on the post, and the person responsible for looking at the speaker applications looked at my profile, saw that I had created a ton of content. So she was like, okay, no brainer. Like this person clearly knows what they're doing. They're visible. We can gauge what type of creator they are, what values they have. And so even like without having to engage at all, they were able to see what my brand stands for. And I think that that's really important. It's kind of like understanding that not everyone engages, so they can watch what you're doing and kind of lurking in the background. And that's sometimes enough for you to have a great impact, even without comments. Of course,
Yeah.
if you have like literally nothing and you've been posting for 2 years, it's time to figure out like why, right? But you
Yes.
know, but I know of a lot of people who don't have engagement at all, and they're like, it's just the depository of content for me. And I'm like, okay, so that's option.
Yeah. I think something you said there's a little bit of a hidden gem in there in the sense that if we are people that get a little too obsessed about our vanity metrics, like the view count and the likes and stuff, it's a good reminder that that story you just shared about the event coordinator seeing the recommendation, seeing you comment on it, and then going and seeing your content, going to your page, looking through it, and they're like, wow, this person really knows their stuff. The message there is to remember that your content is also your portfolio, right?
Yes.
It's serving another purpose than just to get more views, more followers, etc. It's actually there because, like you're saying, people are watching, people are looking, you may not know it, and they're going to that profile page first, and they're looking to see what kind of content you make, how often are you making it. Like it's a telltale sign for someone like an event coordinator whether or not this person may be qualified. So I think understanding the content you're putting up there is representing you and serving another purpose, I think could help alleviate that pressure of getting more follows, more likes, etc.
Yeah, yeah. And just on top of that, so I don't forget to mention this, a lot of people say, well, but I have to have like thousands of followers and like maybe have been a creator with connections and all the things in order to land deals. I I always tell people, you have a skill set, you have like something that you're really good at. And as someone who has worked in the communications department of a nonprofit, I know for a fact that people need content. And if you approach a brand and say, hey, I have this idea that I'm known for, I'm super experienced in this, would you be interested in doing a partnership or a brand collaboration? Most brands are going to say yes, or they're going to say not yet, or they're going to say, well, not really, but how about this? And a clear example of that is like I talk about how when I pitched, I talked to Captivate, Riverside, a bunch of brands, and I don't even have 10,000 followers, added up to on all of my social media, and they all said yes, and we all collaborated in really cool projects. They gave me visibility, more connections to people, even brought me clients. And I don't think that enough people think about like the importance of really like understanding what you're known for or what value you bring to other brands on the table when you're like looking at them and thinking, what is missing from their strategy that I am already naturally good at? So I had a brand collaboration with Asha as well that came purely from the fact that they were like, we love your content. We're so aligned in values, in the type of like education that you create in the marketing space for podcasters, that was just a no-brainer. They were like never asking me like, oh, how many followers do you have? What's your engagement rate? That was never like a conversation on the table. And so I don't think enough people understand that like that is not a metric that people really care about. And so really having that confidence to say, hey, this is what I'm known for. This is what I love and what people know me for. This is the value that will bring to your brand. Like that is invaluable because so many people don't take that first step because they're afraid of rejection. And it's just so silly. And just another thing that is like, well, if you don't ask, nothing's going to happen. And ConvertKit, which is the newsletter that both you and I use, an email provider to send out our newsletter. And I wanted to do some blogs. I know that a few friends of mine had been featured in their blog section. I'm like, oh, for SEO is going to be great to elevate my brand. And so I pitched them as like, hey, I saw that you featured these like top, I think it was like something like top podcasters to look at or top like social media people to look at. I'm like, hey, what about up and coming? And I was like, hey, I've won an award for best, like marketer in, like the year I applied, blah, blah, blah. And they replied and they said, actually, Anna, we're not doing any blogs because we're like going through a restructure. However, we do feature people on the discovery page. Would you like to be featured? I'm like, oh, yes. What do you need? And so that would have never happened. And then months later, someone actually like someone who's a friend of my husband's messaged me like, hey, I spotted you on ConvertKit's feature. I'm like, yes, that was me pitching myself. And again, like all of these things can happen when you go beyond the metrics and you go like, oh, I am valuable for someone and where I am right now is still good enough. And I just gave so much to our viewers right now. I'm like, sorry, I just like bombarded you with a lot of value, but it's true.
It is very true. And I'm actually working with a very large company right now, potentially, right? Like we're going through the song and dance right now. And one of the things that I know from my conversations with them is they don't really care about the reach of your content, right? Let's say it's podcasting for a second. Sure, they want to know what your reach is, but they are more interested in who the target audience is. Does this podcast's audience align with the people we are trying to reach? That's the focus. And they've showed me some of the podcasts that they're partnering with, sponsoring, and there are big names and not even the biggest names. They're not even interested in the biggest names because they're more interested in the focused content, but they're looking at big guns. They're looking at really small podcasts too, as long as we can prove that these podcasts have the right fit audience for them. So yeah, the big names, we sometimes jump to that conclusion that, oh, I'm too small for them. They're already working with other companies. No, they just want to know, is this a good fit for us and our audience?
Yeah. I agree. And the one thing that I will tell, and actually, like, I help so many of my podcast clients with this because they go, me, 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 me. And I'm like, no, 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 no. We're solving a problem for the brand. We're pitching them how we can solve that problem. That's how we pitch. That's the angle. But don't start and don't come at it as, hey, like, I want to be featured in your section, right? Like, provide an element of like, do your research, like find out what is maybe missing. If you're, let's say, an Hispanic content creator and you see that the brand is lacking like Hispanic representation, and you know that there's a ton of value for their brand to be in that market, like offer solutions, but really think about, like, again, that market fit, and how you bring in an audience that they could benefit from, because we always think about like what's in it for me, right? And even at the Riverside podcasters roundtable that we both did, we were talking, you talked about this, right? Like when a podcaster has like the I like starts with like everything about themselves, that you go, well, yeah, not sure I want to listen to the show anymore, right?
Yeah, yeah, making it too much about you and not enough about your audience. Yes, I talk a lot about that. Yeah. And so I feel like we've danced around some mistakes that are fairly common that we see content creators making. So let's stay on that for a moment. Are there any other of, we'll call them your top mistakes that you notice other creators making? And yeah, why don't we dig into that? What's another big mistake you see those content creators making?
I think this is a big one, and not enough people think about this, is not adding enough context as part of the clip that they're sharing or the content that they're sharing. So let's take like this interview, for instance. Like, the person who's scrolling needs to be able, like, first to understand what is going on without having to go and watch the piece. Like, there's this big misconception that like the ultimate goal is taking someone to away from the platform, when in reality we're moving in marketing toward a zero-click strategy. So basically the strategy is meet people where they are. And so that means if you're talking about like the 5 mistakes creators make on social media, I can't just like put a clip that is halfway through a thought and that like needs context for people to engage. Or sometimes people share stuff and it's just kind of like, okay, cool, next. Right? So really think about like as a well-rounded, framed well piece of content. So when you're writing something, like for instance, always make sure that you're using captions, because 60% of people are on their phones without sound, so they can't hear you. And if they can't hear you, they're going to scroll. So again, context, right? Like what is going on? Like maybe having a little bit of a title on top, like what this thing is about, or making something about like talking directly to the user, or having like the caption be the explanation, right? So make sure that whatever is happening, the user always understands what is going on as that piece of content. And like as part of providing more context as well, like think about the like the acronyms is a big one, right? Like if your audience isn't very well versed in acronyms, or kind of like those lingo, that like the lingo that everybody uses, like maybe at your level they are, but like make sure that on the clip you explain and break down like what that lingo means, because again, if people don't understand what's going on, they scroll away, they're not going to engage. Think about like the last time you commented like, I'm not sure I understand what that is. Nobody will say that unless like it's such a visceral reaction that they go and comment, normally trolls. But really thinking about like, do people have everything in their arsenal to read and or watch and really go to the next step, which is to engage. So every single clip you're thinking, do they have all the knowledge that they need to understand and process and comment? Yes. Okay. Post. So that's a huge one. And then I don't think, and we touched a little bit about this, like people don't go on their social media analytics or their podcast analytics or their YouTube analytics, and it feels scary because there's a lot of data, right? Yeah. And so make sure that at least once every 3 months, really look at that, like overarching topics. What are people resonating with? What is the type of content that they're connecting with more? Maybe they're really liking your carousels because you're breaking down, like something that I do a lot, that I always do, because again, the analytics tell me that it works very well, is when I go to podcast conferences, I always, and again, it's my journalistic, like background kicking in, but at the conference, I always take photos of the guests, the sessions I'm attending, and always like take notes of what was said. And I always make like little quotes about like what was in that session that was really relevant for my audience. And every single time I share that, like I always get people who never engage with my account for the first time say, "Oh my gosh, I love this. This was so helpful. Thank you so much." Or someone saying like, "Oh my gosh, I'm glad that they're talking about it." So again, something, and sometimes it looks really janky because I have like a ton of text going over. You can still read it, but it's not like beautifully designed. But what do the analytics tell me? That people engage with it, that people send me messages, that people reshare. I had a ton of people come to me at the conference and they were like, "Oh, wait, the podcast space, I've seen your content before." I'm like, "Yeah, because a lot of the content that I share, Podcast Movement shares." And so they were like, "Oh my God, like that's so cool." And again, some of these are like well designed, some of these are a little like less professional, and it's all good, right? Like, again, looking at the analytics, if there's engagement, there's a reason. Even though you're in your core like, "Oh, it's not the most beautiful thing I've designed," but if people resonate with it, keep doing it. I think that sometimes we get in our head about like what we should look like, what like our content should look like, what our brand is supposed to be. But if in reality we don't have the capacity to do that, well, do what is already working, double down on that, and it really will be a differentiator online, because people are struggling with like, how do I stand out? I'm like, if that works, keep doing it. Stop looking at what your competitors are doing and focus on what you enjoy as well.
Yeah. All right. Two things I want to ask you about, a couple of things you shared. One was adding context, which I think is so important. And it's something that I continue to catch myself not doing enough of, right? So I'm always restructuring and fine tuning the content that I'm putting out. How do we add more context, specifically if we're trying to harvest from our long form content, like say a podcast episode? We're pulling clips from that, but sometimes we can't necessarily, just from the clip itself, it's not enough for context. And I'll kick it off as far as ideas for our audience. For example, one way I'll do that, if I'm using a clip, say from this Minvo Procast, what I might do is take advantage of putting on a text title on the opening frames when those first words are being spoken, because sometimes just giving it a title will be enough for the person to connect with, okay, this is what we're getting into now. And then the words that follow coming out of the person's mouth, that's going to make more sense to the viewer, right? So sometimes just simply adding a simple digestible title could be enough for context. What else would you suggest?
Well, that's a great one, and it's easy, right? Like it's just like writing it down. You don't need to spend a ton of time editing. I would say sometimes actually think about like mixing and matching styles. So grab your phone, and if you can't find a clip that really like provides context in the beginning, record it yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And say, have you ever like wondered why people aren't engaging with your content? It actually may be down to context. And then like use that clip that where I'm talking about context, right? So you're mixing a direct to camera video, which tends to perform better than sometimes clips. And so then bridges to the podcast. So that's another example. And it's just fairly easy enough that is, like such a no-brainer if like it's already very busy in the frame, and you can't add anything else, like that's an option. Or really having something that indicates like, hey, read the caption for the full context, or do like maybe a series of posts and say like, hey, check out the previous post for context. It's a little bit more work, but an alternative way, I guess. So just really thinking about those three elements. Like text is great, telling people to read the caption first, and doing a direct to camera video where you're giving the context in a very succinct way.
I love that. And for our Minvo users, you can do that very easily. If you're taking a clip from your content and you need to add that little intro like Anna's suggesting, they have that feature. You can add an intro or outro feature, or you can add a clip of an intro or an outro of you talking to camera, setting up that clip. You can add it to the front, add it to the end of the content that you've uploaded to Minvo to edit before you publish that clip. So that'll work. That definitely makes a lot of sense. That's why that feature is available on Minvo. The other thing I wanted to ask you was, you were talking about analytics and, suggesting look at it at least once every 3 months or so. If one of the people listening right now or watching right now are saying, yeah, I'm one of those that are afraid or overwhelmed by all the analytics, say on YouTube, for example, there are so many great analytics there, but I don't know where to focus. Like, where should I really focus my efforts if I'm going to dig into the analytics so that I'm not so overwhelmed? Right. So are there like 1, 2, 3 different pieces of statistics analytics that you would recommend that they focus mostly on?
Yeah, I think overall retention rate, so drop off points. So how long were people listening for or watching for? And then realizing like, okay, they stopped here. Why was that? What was it? Because you were like veering off into the world? Was it a loud noise? Was it because it started getting not interesting at all? Or was it because maybe it was too much of a clip that was like too fast? Let's say you're doing editing and it was just kind of like you were panning with your camera, and it was like kind of like a little got a little dizzy from watching it. Like, that's something that I sometimes see, is like the transitions are like too much. So really look into what may have been the cause that stopped them from watching at that point. So maybe is if you have a transition track and is the music too loud, it gets people kind of like annoyed. Is it because maybe you don't have any captions? I saw a brand, which I'm not going to name, that had like captions in the beginning, and they would stop having captions, and then the rest of the video was without captions to force people to watch, and they stopped doing it. Now everything has captions because probably they look at the analytics and like, well, people were scrolling away. And that's really important. Again, going back to that number, 60% of people watch content on their phone with sound off. So again, that's like an indication. So basically retention rate and drop-off points are really, really important. I would think about like the format as well. Really think about like, what is the format that you're using? If it's like maybe people engage, and that's like seems to be true on like a direct to camera video when it's you talking to the viewer versus like sometimes an interview, and that transition maybe like getting people off. But normally when it's like us in a setting that feels more homey, those videos tend to perform better, unless it's like a clip that looks very beautiful and stuff. Like aesthetics do take a huge part, like colors, light. Those elements really will influence the performance of a video. So when you're looking at what did well and what didn't, think about these elements. Like, did you maybe go into a natural light, into a window to record that video and just looks nicer? Or maybe because it has your face versus a video without a face. Like, what are the elements that are consistent about the videos that performed well all across? And just maybe see like the ones that people engaged with the most. Because sometimes it's that, and also the second thing is, what were you talking about? Because videos, they are inspirational or highly educational. To be honest, educational doesn't perform as well as like inspirational. So again, you may want to sprinkle some inspirational test, but at the end of the day, if you are a business owner, well, inspiration is not going to bring you dollars. Yeah. So really be about like strategic about this. But thinking about, again, why were people watching? Was it what you were talking about? Again, the content of the clip, or because it was a visual element? Those, like, I'd say like, yeah, like those are the two things, like drop off points, visual elements, what got them to connect with it, and the content, the type of content.
Okay. Excuse me. Okay. So then now I'm wanting to dig into the content itself, and really, if we're putting out clips, how we can optimize those clips, whether that's getting the right size, the right keywords or hashtags. Can you share some practical tips for creators who want to better optimize their content across different platforms?
Yes. So let's talk about visuals and then content itself. So visuals, what performs very well is want content that looks pretty. And we were talking about like earlier in the beginning of the stream about how like people don't need like as much of a professional setup as much. But again, content that is well lit, that doesn't get very, very busy, performs better than the content that has like all the keywords, all the text, all the elements, all the animations. It gets people really overwhelmed. So as a rule of thumb, less is more. Always make sure you have captions, again, because not all platforms do have captions. So to help people optimize the content for watch time, make sure that people can listen. So again, visuals about that. And then really thinking about format. If you are putting landscape mode on Instagram or on TikTok, the video, like how much does someone need to zoom in to see your face? How much is that experience pleasant, right? Like rating from 1 to 5. Like, would you rather watch a video that looks good on Instagram or a video that looks like a little like meh, and is like maybe on a horizontal frame? So thinking about when we're creating content, we're creating the best possible experience for the user. And again, you don't need to go on Canva and like design a bunch of elements and jazz it up. Like, don't do it. Less is more in that sense. And then in terms of content itself, don't start with don't start with half like middle of the word. Really think about like how if people are scrolling, they want to understand what you're saying. And if it's people are going like, oh God, scroll, right? So create punchy stuff. Start with a hook. And for instance, like you create great content, like every single video is intentional, right? Like it starts with like, hey, like I really want to watch what's going on because I'm like, I know exactly what it is that you're talking about. So start there and then make sure that, again, on the caption, you have the keywords, because treat every social media like a search engine. So if I want to find out something about, like video clips, like make sure that if you're talking about video clips, you include those keywords in your text. And again, you don't need to write a novel, but make sure that you have those instead of just saying, new episode is out, have like, video is something that's really important for content creators moving forward. It may feel like it's a little bit of a lot of work to do every week, but again, it will help you connect deeper with your audience, right? So what would we have? Audience, clip, creator, like all of these things that we know that we're going to be talking about incorporated on that caption, because search engines still can't like read content as much as they can, or as fast or effectively as they can read text. So and again, who uses social media? Humans. So even if you're trying to optimize for a machine, like humans are going to be using it. So optimize for those. So what are like using natural language? So basically what people would be saying. So for instance, better ways to create video content or better ways to optimize content versus content, right? Or like video creators, like what is it that someone is going to type? And again, voice search is huge. How would you say something? A lot of people like go like really fancy on their like captions. And like, would anyone search for that through their voice assistant? So I can't say the name of mine because otherwise it's gonna like start talking to me.
Right.
But yeah, those I think are really good ones.
Okay, so I have a question in the chat, and I believe we pronounce his name Rene, R-E-N-E. Rene asks, Anna, do you suggest adding different backgrounds, outside scenery, or stay consistent with the studio background?
I would say definitely test. So I think outside scenery, especially cars perform really well for two reasons. One, everyone has one, or most people have one. And two, it's going to be relatable because normally the content that is from a car is either like a thought or a rant. And so people are like, oh, I'm going to watch that.
And it's got that behind the scenes vibe to it too.
Yeah, exactly. There's that sense of like the behind the scenes. I would maybe pick like 2 or 3 scenes, no more than that. So test like in the car, in the studio, and walking, and see how those 3 perform. And maybe you may be surprised, how some will perform better than others. But as an audience member, we're always curious about what our favorite creators are up to. So we're like, ooh, what is their car like? Ooh, where do they live? So all of these elements help paint a picture of who you are as a creator beyond the studio. So I think it's important to, again, if you already do clips in the studio, then test with something else. And again, for instance, if you're someone who, like me, I don't like recording content publicly. So like I can create, do, and speak on stage. But man, get me in front of like a busy studio to say, hey, record yourself talking to the camera. I'm like, cringe. That ain't, I'm not there in my content creation era yet. But so to really think about like also what's comfortable for you, but also what you want to push yourself and test new things. Again, cars are great because they're also very well insulated. So in terms of sound, you don't need to do any edits to it. So that's one of the reasons people record in their cars.
Yeah, good point. And you mentioned maybe I love the idea of picking 3 environments and sticking to those and then testing to see what performs really well. One of the 3 things you said was walking, which I've definitely seen perform well. If Rennie wanted to change that up a little bit, say didn't want to do the walking thing, another great one is to do some kind of activity you normally do while you're explaining the thing, sharing that thought, etc. Because a lot of times I think people are not only interested in that thought, but now they're interested in whatever it is you're doing, and they want to see, you get from point A to point B. So try that one too, if that one appeals to you more than the walking video. But I promise those walking videos do, generally speaking, pretty well. So it's up to you, Rennie, how you want to do it. But I think take it as advice as far as picking 3 and then sticking to that for a little while.
Yeah, and even thinking about like props. Is there a prop that is connected to the thing you talk about on your podcast so that it creates an element of connection to when you're outside? So if you're someone who talks about finance, for instance, bring something that would be associated with finance, like as like maybe it's on your hand, or like maybe if you wear jewelry or a T-shirt or something that connects it all, so that people know what you're talking about. So that's subliminal messaging.
Yes, indeed. Okay, Anna, before my last question, please let the audience know where they can find you, best places to find you. If they're interested in working with you, how do they do that?
Yes, so you can connect with me. I'm at the podcast space, THE podcast as singular and space. So basically, behind me, you can see the sign. That's what it's spelled. On Instagram, I teach so much about podcasting and how to show up as a leader, how to show up organically, how to show up in a way that like actually feels exciting and experiment. And so follow with me there. And then if you're on LinkedIn as well, I'm at Ana Xavier, like X-Men, like Xavier, Professor Xavier.
Yeah, great
connect
reference.
with me there.
I'll take that reference. Yeah. Okay. So for our last question, for the creators that are struggling with overwhelm, we talked about them struggling with overwhelm of statistics and analytics, but there is more to be overwhelmed with sometimes as a content creator. So what's your top strategy to help somebody maintain consistency, creativity without burning out?
That is one of the reasons why most podcasters, most content creators give up, right? Like they feel like they have to do all the things. I think it's really leaning in. If you're someone who created a ton of content before and now you're feeling the burnout, like I think it's harder for people who were creating a ton because it's like the expectation is high. So really look into like the seasons and think, how can I adjust my like energy levels and still show up? So really look into how your day is doing and how you feel like you gravitate toward maybe creating more videos in the spring, or like don't get stuck into the shoulds and think about more like, can I still show up? Do produce 1 to 2 pieces of content and kind of like be realistic. Don't go post 5 times. Think about like, can I show up 2 times, but those 2 times are really good quality and I can spend time investing and engaging. I think that this is like an underrated strategy. You can really build a ton of good karma and good rapport and visibility by commenting on other people's posts. So create less, engage more if you feel really overwhelmed. So you're still showing up on people's feeds, just in a different way. I see so many people growing their accounts just by sharing other people's content, because again, when you do it, someone else will comment on it. You're still getting visibility, you're still showing up, but you don't have to create it from scratch. So mix and match a little bit of what you're doing, and think about the formats. Like for instance, right now, I have created a ton of carousels and static posts because I just don't have the energy to show up on video. It's because, baby, I'm moving soon, and like I'm kind of like just feeling tired and stressed. So can I create carousels? They're not going to perform as well as a video, sure, but I still am showing up. It's better than saying, well, it's either video or nothing, and then I feel bad because I haven't recorded a single video, right? So look into the format that you're leaning in. Maybe this season you do more carousels and one video a month, but really mixing and matching in a capacity that feels exciting versus overwhelmed and frustrating.
Yeah, thank you, Anna. And something you said there, engage more, create less if you are feeling overwhelmed. And that goes back to something we talked about a little while ago. You still have content, right? So if you are engaging with other posts, people will get curious and probably go, I know this is what I do. If I see somebody comment something that makes me curious, I'll go and look at their profile. That's the first thing I'm going to go do. And you've already got your library of content up there to feel good about and stand on and be proud of, and allow them to go engage with that content, because it's most likely the first time they're ever seeing it.
Yeah, and repurposing that old content that maybe you shared 3 months from now, right? Like maybe that new audience hasn't seen it, maybe the audience seen it and forgot it. So really think about, like, I do a lot of content recycling. So I did a carousel about newsletters, the 5 types of newsletters that podcasters can use to grow their show. And I tried like high focus, where it's like you're breaking down something that you talked on the show, and like things that are just like lists. And then I turned that social media post, that carousel post, into a newsletter. So it was very meta because it was a newsletter about newsletters. But right, like nobody commented back like, oh, how dare you use, I saw that on Instagram. Like it literally got people like, oh my gosh, I never thought about this. And then a creator said that she was going to expand on those and add more content. I'm like, awesome. So you really need to work smarter and not harder. And so look at a post and say, hey, can that post be actually what I talk about on a newsletter? Or that carousel post, can I actually do a video version of it? Because it will engage different people. And again, it just kind of like, people forget quickly. Yeah. They will. And so maybe you add one more element that you didn't cover on that post, because we always do that, right? We post something and they're like, oh, I forgot about that thing. And so talk about it on a video.
Yeah, absolutely. I know every so often I post something that was from 1 year, 2 years ago, and it will get reactions as if I'd never posted it before. Yeah, and there have been people that have commented on the original one that go back and comment on this new one as if they had never seen it before. So they really do forget. They really do.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Ana Xavier, thank you so much for spending this hour with me. I really appreciate it. And a little behind the scenes for everybody. I had reached out to Anna recently asking her if she'd be interested in joining us. And she said, that's funny. I was just about to reach out to you to see if you wanted me on as a guest. So it all worked out well. Serendipity, I suppose. Anna, thank you so much today for joining us, for sharing all of your knowledge with the Minvo community. We appreciate you.
Thank you for having me. It was a blast.
Yeah, and stick around as we wrap up. I want to say a personal goodbye to you as well. And thank you all for joining us on the Minvo Procast. We're back again next week, Tuesday, 12 p.m. Eastern. We'll talk with more creators like you to help give you the advantage with your content creation. Until then, make it a great day, everybody. Take care.